All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's equity meeting, this April of 29th of 2024. I would like to open the meeting by asking anyone, is there any questions in reference to our meeting minutes? Going once, going twice, no questions. All right, at this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. And we have with us today Deborah Falk, the Executive Director of Business Affairs, who has an APS Sports Facilities Investments report. Wanted to just say that this came by way of board member Autry, who asked for a review of investments in APS athletic facilities. So I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Falk.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman. And to my left, I'd like to introduce Mr. Stephen Keenan. He is our interim director for facilities, and he might be able to also answer some of these questions as well. In the request for member Autry from the board, we were asked to give you background, and in front of you, you will find an Excel spreadsheet. We're listing our middle school and high school, mostly high school, athletic investments that we have done since FY16. And as you read it across, I want you to note at the top, because some of the schools have had investment from the OFCC building process, in which, and I'll give you an example, as you are aware, currently North is the one high school that hasn't been rebuilt. But when the OFCC worked on the schools with us, that did not mean that the funds could be used for athletic items that were not affected by the build. So those items that we could replace came out of what is called the LFI funds for those projects. The second item I just wanted you to be able to read on your Excel spreadsheet, you will notice that we have listed the schools in the very left column. We have given the type of work performed by title, the nature of the work, the funding source. Member Autry wanted to know what came out of general fund, but we have also listed donations if they came to us. The dollar amount, the year in which the work was performed, some miscellaneous information. And the last two columns on the first page then totals exactly what the high schools had total in this report. So as an example, you will see a total amount for each high school that is related to each item on this report. And you will see over the last period that we're reporting, APS at the very top of the report has $7,751,944.36 has been expended during the time period that they asked us to review. And some of these items needed to be replaced because of, as an example, they were improvements that went before the Permanent Improvement Committee. That is a long-standing internal committee that consists of requests that came in from departments such as athletics or individual principals for their buildings or particular department heads. They were reviewed. The committee, when it is active, consists of the superintendent, the treasurer, the executive director of business affairs, the director of facilities, as well as our project manager. And the PIP committee then goes through the items that are put in front of us, athletic or non-athletic related, and we actually then determined how they would score, meaning score number one means it's imminent that it needs to be done. Two is that it is definitely considered and we are looking for the funding, and then some items are then rejected. And we wanted to just focus on athletics at this time. So as an example, we've given you also at the very bottom on the last page, we gave you a listing of the facilities located at each of the high schools and middle schools. So you will see whether the high school has, example, a track, a stadium, a softball field, a baseball field, a gymnasium, weight room, and pool. And if it is a yes, that means that the facility has that particular item. If it is a no, it means it does not. And we went ahead and tried to give you some updates as an example on the tracks, whether they are still cinder, which is what they were originally made from. And we also did whether they were competition eligible, and currently we only have one competition eligible track. And we also gave you whether they did not have a track. Because some of the new builds, and I'll use Garfield's property as an example, the original high school did have a practice field with a practice track, and when the new building was built, the property was not big enough to contain one. And so it ended up with a small practice football field only that is really not even eligible other than 75 yards for practice. And so on top of what I've given you here to give you an idea of the expenditures, we have also given you the 5-year plan that Mr. Alexander, as a member of the athletic committee, has worked on with us since 2019. The athletic committee under Mr. Vassilotti meets once a month to talk about a variety of things: student eligibility, different types of sports that we are doing by season. And one of the items that we did in 2019 was an outdoor athletic facility study. If you carefully read the study, we went on to give you an evaluation parameter, and we were looking at the Ohio High School Athletic Association uses, National Federation State High School Association game rules as we were going through this. It is a very, very long piece of information. Mr. Alexander, do you have a copy?
I do have a copy here. So.
Okay, thank you. And then we gave you the standards of an example, what a football field was, a baseball field, a soccer field. And then at the time that we did the study, we included high school sports and who participated by high school into each of the sports we had at that time, and the same at the middle school. So this is for your review as you went through. I would like to have you go to the very, as you continue, you would look over each one of the schools as an overview of the facilities they had. Some 2019 cost estimates were available, but what was very important are the actual last 2 pages. There was a 5-year plan, athletic facility upgrades, and these were given a listing of priority. Number 1 was 2 all-weather synthetic tracks, Ellet to be reconstructed, and at that time it was Firestone. Number 2 was the press box renovation for Buchtel. Number 3 was artificial turf at Buchtel Stadium. Number 4 was lighting at another stadium in addition to Ellet. Ellet is currently our only stadium that has the capacity for lighting to allow night games and night activities by all our schools and our community use. And then there was a consideration for Buchtel and Firestone. Then there was another all-weather track services. We were looking at East, North, and at that time, Kenmore Garfield. And then the bigger topic, which some of you have heard recently, is a neutral site. And that neutral site has been discussed as possibly what used to be the old Kent Middle School property, which is now vacant and available for use because the building had been demolished following the construction of the Kenmore project. And we had a 5-year plan listed at the bottom, what we hope to do in 1920, 2021, 21-22, 22-23, 23-24. Now, I will be very honest with you. Some of this did get off kilter due to COVID and some changes that occurred as we went out to look at these. Some of these upgrades have happened, such as the wonderful donations from the Browns for the Ellet turf as well as the Buchtel turf. And we also had some other donations to us from local community organizations to Buchtel and to Firestone. But it does not meet all our needs. The reason this came up is we are looking at securing approval from the board for a maintenance issue at Ellett. The lighting system is original to the stadium. We currently have 19 lights that are not usable at all. We cannot upgrade those lights as we cannot find the parts and the pieces, and Mr. Keenan can speak a little more to that if you have questions. The recommendation also includes a upgrade of the lighting type to LEDs. Some of the reasons we are doing this is not only is it not functioning well, we are hearing from the refs that they cannot see well enough because it's too dimly lit as we are playing. For all of our schools, we do night games for high schools. We have community events. We have done some middle schools. We do track there. And there are times, depending on what is needed, is the lights also have to be operating. Besides having refs have certain concerns about safety, we have also had issues with photography, of events not being lit as well as it should be. And our major concern on the behest of Mr. Keenan and myself are a safety issue, and I'll give you an example. If I'm terrible about walking downstairs, I don't necessarily always see them. If the lighting is not good and I'm not able to walk down the bleachers, which were new, they are up to standard, but I fall, and because I cannot see, and Mr. Diefenbaugh and I have spoken about, that becomes a negligent issue for something that we could be held harmful for under our insurance. So these are investments that we need to make. We want to make new investments as funding becomes available. Since I was asked to look at this, Mr. Keenan and I have worked on 2 of the issues that were listed. We currently are looking at the press box and the concession stand at Buchtel. We had the architects go out. That is a structure from the 1950s. And we were asked why it didn't have water. It's because it was never built with water. But in order to look at that, we went out and had the architects go look at its current structure so that we can determine what needs to happen. We were also asked, and one of the items was to do an upgrade to Buchtel's track as well, similar to what happened at Ellett. Please be advised, Buchtel's track will never be a competition track. It is 200 yards too short. But if we upgraded a surface to something rubberized similar to Ellett and what Firestone will happen this summer, or did a slightly upgrade but not full to rubber, we have obtained those quotes. And those quotes are extensively expensive, and we would have to look for funding. So it's not that we're not looking at these to try to build in availability for our high school sports. Our community group is currently trying to figure out how we can accommodate not only our high school but our middle school sports, which we have increased, and we have community use and wanting to do those as well. So I present this to you on behalf of your PIP committee, who's been around for a long time, and the work that the athletic committee has been doing since its inception with Mr. Basilotti. I'm open to questions. I can try and answer anything that you would like.
So before I got into this role, I was a community member, which I still am.
Sure.
And watching all of these schools being built, you feel some kind of way, right? I'm a Buchtel grad. I live in West Akron. But you see other schools getting more than some schools. What was the reason for these schools being built back so far? It's kind of like it was designed to take things away on purpose. Such as when we talk about Buchtel, before it was pushed up a little further, we have all of that acreage up front, but yet we built the schools all the way to the back, and then we took away a track field, which we had a top tier track team.
Okay, one of the concerns at Buchtel at the time it was built is the plan was to save the original competition gym. If you remember, that was a large gym that actually met the needs of the school, and the school had to be built in such a structure as it was to meet the needs of that gym. And what ended up happening was, in order to do that structure back there, the retention ponds and items to drain the water off the property are under that big green field that you see in front. So those are some of the requirements under the OFC. As we worked with Summit County to permit, we had to make sure we could follow the trail of the water. You just could not allow it to dump onto the streets or into the sewer without the retention ponds. So some of what everybody assumes is green space, it's beautiful on top, and it was to be used as a practice field, but that does not mean there isn't other structures underneath that met the needs of the build as required. But the competition gym was a focal point of building Buchtel the way we did. It also needed to be a self-swing, which meant, as you remember, Ms. Hall, the students stayed housed on the property, and we had to build on it because you couldn't swing them off property. We had no other place to put them. So we were also doing a self-swing at the time. But
So other schools were not swing. Some schools went to other locations, right?
Elementaries were the ones that self-swung
Okay.
the most. And that's when we purchased the 400 West Market property. And we did the renovations, and we actually could house, say, elementary number 1 on the main floor and elementary number 2 on the other floor. When we got into the middle schools and high schools, Jennings was a self-swing because it was built in the back of the current school. Higher was a self-swing. So each one was a unique piece of property. If you remember correctly, when we did the Firestone Litchfield campus, originally the school faced Rampart for the high school and Fairfax for Litchfield. We actually physically tossed it. It's now to the front on Castle, and we built everything around the natatorium and attached the natatorium because that was a focal point as well. So each property was truly unique in meeting the needs. We weren't trying to take anything away. It's what was the property size and what could it house. So that was some of the considerations as that went to each project. How many students would be on campus, what was the programming, and what was the physical campus that could take the building that we were building.
Okay, because I just see, like, far as we take some things away from schools, but then the schools that did not have the capability of having certain things, we gave that to them.
Well, now, as an example, can you give me an example of what you're talking
Well,
about?
when we talk about, Buchtel being 200 feet short from being a competitive.
It's always been 200 feet short.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that is the original stadium to the school. And to be honest with you, Ms. Hall, as an example, if you really had the money and could build Buchtel correctly, it's actually in the wrong direction. It faces east and west. A football field should face north and south. And we did look at that at the prospect, and we did look at even in later years a lighting upgrade. So let's talk about trying to turn the property correctly. At the time, if you wanted to turn it, you would have to buy 7 more pieces of property. OFCC did not provide you any funding to purchase property. When we look to even do the lighting in the current configuration with Dr. James and Mr. Pendleton, the last install for upgrading the lighting was over $500,000. So those are some of the considerations, what funds are available. But that is the original location of the track and of the stadium at Buchtel. Just like the pool is the original pool that was built in 1963 and 64 for Firestone. At Ellett, that stadium was existing on the property. What happened there was the school faced Wolf, and the baseball field was next to the stadium. And when we built it, because we needed it to be a self-swing, the students stayed in the old high school. We took down the baseball stadium and built the school where the stadium was for baseball next to the regular full stadium, and now have replaced this baseball field in a similar manner where Firestone flipped to Castle, its practice field, and walking practice track was replaced, and it's now on Rampart.
Because Firestone didn't have a track before.
It's never had, it's
Right.
only had what you and I would call a practice field and a walking track. It was
Okay.
still cinder, but it
Yeah.
was never a competition track.
Okay, that's what I was trying to say, far as when you said compare
Yeah.
with Bookville being the way it is, and then adding, giving Firestone a track and things like
Yeah.
that, which is great for the kids. I just think, we kind of did a disservice a little bit to, some of our kids by taking away so much.
Now, the one that's
acreage.
unique is East, because East was not a new build. East was a reno add. So the original high school still exists, and it was renovated, and then they added the new building for the middle school section. So there were 2 reno ads in the process. East was one of them, and Ennis was the other. So the original building structures, although renovated, were still standing structures on the property that they exist.
Okay.
And so those were some of the uniqueness to each property as we went through. And we started the OFC in 2003. Jennings was the first middle school. As an example, I think Resnick and Boris were the first elementary schools, and then we kept going through. So we just finished, as you are aware, Garfield was our last build, and so now we do not have any more participation in the OFCC project process.
And then one last question, I'll be quiet. Sorry, guys. When we look at where the schools have certain sports, when we talk about like golf and soccer and tennis, and you have, male or female, right? The M's and F's.
Now, remember, this is from 2019, so
Okay.
there has been changes to some of those teams since then.
Okay, let me ask my question real quick. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Is it that the schools have leagues that participate somewhere off-site? Or do some of these schools have the capability of having this on their campus?
So as an example, let's talk about golf and tennis.
Yeah.
Okay. Golf and tennis, as an example, comes around because there are enough kids that are interested to be part of that program. No, we do not have tennis courts at any of our schools.
Okay.
So they truly do
Go somewhere
compete
else.
and compete over there. And the same is with soccer. Now, our new fields, turf fields at Bookville and Ellett are actually multi-purpose fields. You can play soccer and lacrosse on them. But many of the places that we actually compete again, we go out and work with the city of Akron, and we play at the Copley Field. Now, the other one that's very interesting is you'll see softball. Our original softball location was Kent, and we had the softball field there. We have worked cooperatively, and it is listed in the Excel spreadsheet. Now we have access to the Firestone softball stadium that the city has renovated, and they actually called us to see how many teams we had that played softball. And our teams get to go there, so right now we don't need a softball field because we can play there, we can practice, and we compete. And I'm going to be honest with you, that new stadium at Firestone is the best in the state of Ohio. And I happen to pass it often, and you will see them now that it is truly softball, season. It is well used, and I think the city told me that they will have the state championships again there.
Okay.
There's still some renovations, the city is doing that, but we try very hard to work cooperatively with the city for the assets for our teams when they are not available on our own properties.
Okay.
All righty?
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I think I broke my microphone, so I think it's always on. So apologize for that now.
Well, we'll look at that tomorrow.
But aside from that, I have, I think, only 3 questions. So first, thank you for all of this information and having it all in one place. Even 2019 is better than nothing. It's a reference point. It's a start. I can't wait to see the 2024 version, but this is a great conversation. So thank you to everyone who was involved in
Absolutely.
this. The far right column, we have our totals here.
Yes.
List of schools and the field, and then the final totals over here. Is this the grand total, including donations, or is this total of just general funds?
That is grand total of everything put in there.
Okay, so because I noticed there are a lot of donations in here that are nothing to ignore, right? I see, Bookdale PTA
Yeah.
had $13,000, and I would imagine that a lot of the donations that were given to specific sites, we could not then pick or choose what that went to or what that went
That is
towards.
correct.
So the church donation went to Bookdale, the Cleveland Browns went to Ellett, and then
And Bookdale.
and then I noticed there's a lot of Firestone parents
Yes.
donations here, and those had to go to Firestone. So
That is correct.
I'm curious. I'll sit here with a calculator later as we head towards these levy conversations and people are critical of the decisions we're making. Some of these finances aren't necessarily decisions made at this table per se, but some of them are. And so my next question then is back to this 2019. I know this is not completely current, but I noticed that, for instance, like STEM and early college don't have any of their own teams.
And they are not allowed to under the Ohio High School Athletic Association. The students that enroll in those schools must play at their residential location. So as an example, if I am a STEM high school student, but I live in the East Cluster, I must play for the East teams.
So that leads me, I guess, to my next question. So if I'm a STEM student and I go to Firestone and Firestone has a tennis and a golf team, I can play tennis and golf. But the person who sits next to me who goes to a school that doesn't have a tennis or a golf team, they can't join.
They cannot. They have
that
to go.
tennis or golf.
They cannot. And that's Ohio High School Athletic Association rules. And you've been here, and actually you will see in the meeting of the 6th, the board will have its new resolution to join the Ohio High School Athletic Association on an annual basis. And it is a resolution that we participate, all high schools do in the state of Ohio or the state of Pennsylvania. This just happens to be Ohio. And you must do a resolution, and when you do it, you follow their rules. Now, one thing I will share with you, it wasn't too long ago, at one point we had very active football at East, and I think Mr. Alexander will remember this discussion, and a very active set of soccer at North. And we wanted to your point, could we really focus on football, say, at East, and focus on soccer at North? And we checked with the Ohio High School Association, and we could not. The students had to have their teams at their school where they are enrolled for their residents. So there are very specific rules as to what we do follow. And we do a great job. Mr. Basilotti and Mr. Linger and his staff do a great job of making sure we meet those compliance so we can compete and our students become eligible if they want to go on to post-secondary athletics.
Thank you.
Mr. Alexander?
I'm trying to find where the cost is for the LED lights for Ellett on here. Did I miss that?
It is not on there because it has not been approved.
Oh, okay.
If it is currently listed in the meeting of 5-6, and it's $226,000.
Okay.
All righty.
Anyone else have a question?
I just have one more question.
Yes.
You talked about walking up and down the stairs when it's dark. Have we ever thought about doing solar lights on the stairs at some of these, or since Ellett is the only school that can do night games?
You know, as an example, the bleachers, as you notice, are all fairly brand new. Ellett, Kenmore, and Bookdale all got bleachers at the time. It's a possibility now that you've brought that up, and some of those items would be there, that Mr. Keenan and I can certainly put that as an item for consideration in the permanent improvements panel. I just use that as an example because Mr. Diefenbaugh Shaw and I were talking about, what is important when it comes to safety and maintenance. And as you know, if we know about something and somebody comes back with a claim, is if we do not know about it and it is not considered negligence on our part, then that's fine. But if we truly know about it and it is something that we should have addressed, such as lighting, then we could be found negligent under an insurance claim. And those are the things you do want to try and avoid, just like at your own home property or with your own car insurance. So it is not an unusual item for you to say, would we consider that? And you've noticed out here on our lighting here at the building, when it was built, somebody had the foresight to have lighting go down our stairs and down our ramp here. When we got here, it didn't work. So we made sure that that was part of the renovations and upgrades that the staff at our facilities put in, because we wanted to make sure you could see, because the lighting here needed to be some upgrades. So these are important safety considerations, but now that we've heard about it, Mr. Keenan and I will add it to the listing. Okay?
And there's one last question. One last question. I promise I'll be quiet. Since Ellet is the only school that can have night games,
Yes.
when other schools come and participate or championship games, is that money split? Again, being a community member before being here, you would hear stories that because they're playing at that school, they got the bulk of the money, but they're getting students and family members from all over. It's kind of like, what was the old... You
Say that Ellet's playing spring... Bookdale and...
Like the Rubber Bowl.
Are we talking like Bookdale and Ellet
Well, I'm talking
playing?
about any school. Any school. So if North and
Springfield.
say, no, I'm really like Akron schools, like North
Okay.
and Garfield,
Yeah.
make it to their city championship and they play at play at Ellet.
Sure.
Is that money dispersed to those schools?
It depends on what group is actually doing the concession. Because you'll have, say, the Bookdale concessions asked to go out and do that, and they will take those funds with them.
Okay. What about just coming, not even just the concession, but the ticket sales? That's the biggest concession. I understand that part, but as far as like ticket sales.
The ticket sales are, you buy it for the game, and the game funds go into the athletic funds. And then Mr. Basilotti and his team work on exactly how that disbursement is. It doesn't necessarily go to the individual school. It goes into the athletic funds for the department. But I'm more than...
So that's every school, like, so if you play at Firestone,
Yeah.
Firestone gets the ticket money and then that goes into a fund?
Yeah.
It does not go into the
They
school?
go into student athletic funds for the school. And you've seen those within the funds that are under policies. And in fact, you'll see some of those funds under policies coming up on the 6th.
So you said it goes in the fund
The
for
funds-
the schools or school?
It can go into the athletic funds for the department, and they disperse it out to the school.
Okay.
Because most of the tickets now are online, and that's another upgrade that Mr. Basilotti and his staff are doing. Not that I can't go there and buy a cash ticket, because the legislature decided that should still be available, and that is available. Well, at one point, the legislation didn't say that, so they made a change. And then they oversee that part of it. But if they're doing student sales, then they go into the student funds, which are 018 funds assigned to the school, or 300s, which are athletics.
Okay.
All righty?
All right,
Yeah.
thank you so much for
And I
sharing.
think, too, Mrs. Hall, we might want to ask Joe Basilotti about that specific process
Absolutely.
of ticket sales. Because to your question, if 300 Bookdale students bought their tickets online for the Bookdale East game at Ellet, are we ensuring that the 300 purchased tickets online from the Bookdale students go into the Bookdale Fund, and
Right.
the other 300 go into the East Fund? And I think Joe Basilotti would be the person to be sure that that is the actual process, because I think that's the question I heard you ask.
And I didn't ask Mr. Basilotti to attend tonight, but unfortunately, there was an event he had to be, and it was not going to get done before 6 o'clock. So he is aware that we thought we might get some questions.
Okay, thank you. It's just,
You're welcome.
you hear a lot of commotions in the community.
Yep.
And we want to get the right answers.
Yep.
Versus continue to spread
And I don't want to
rumors.
say it's incorrect.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
Any other questions for Dr.
It's
Moore?
okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you for allowing us to ask all these questions also. My next question, I guess to piggyback off of my high school question, for the middle school sports. If I have a student, or if a student is attending a middle school and that middle school does not have, let's say, a tennis or golf team, could that middle schooler attend or join a middle school sport on another one of these off sites, which might affect their choice of a high school as they end up making their decisions later?
I don't want to comment on that only because you have 2 enrolled middle schools, STEM Middle and Miller South, and I don't think that they don't follow the same thing as Ohio High School athletics, but I'd rather have Mr. Basilotti answer that correctly for you. Because at one time prior to the 2012 levy passing, middle school sports had stopped. And that was one of the items that started to go in, and it has grown over the last number of years, and I don't want to say incorrectly how that affects. I know our 7th and 8th graders can participate in sports at the high school rules, and as far as I know, they are the same rules for the high school as the middle school. So as an example, if I'm at Ennis, I'm following the same rules that you would at Garfield. I'm doing the feeder school to Garfield. So I don't want to say that STEM and STEM Middle and Miller South wouldn't have to go back to the residential as well.
They do. Just to confirm that my brother went to STEM Middle.
Thank you.
And STEM High. And to play sports, we lived in the Bookto cluster. He had to play at Bookto. My daughter went to Miller South.
Okay.
And to play basketball, she had to play at Bookto.
So we're
it's
following the same
sport.
rules is what you're saying,
But
Ms.
I
Hall.
wish we could.
Is the resolution, is it a separate resolution for middle school sports as high school sports?
No.
It's one.
It is one resolution because you're joining the Ohio High School Athletic Association as a district. And it actually has the district's IRN in it as listed.
Just one last thing. I wish we could be more attractive when it comes to our sports, because when you look at the suburban schools and some private schools, and we talked about this in our committee about the sports, a lot of these schools start in 3rd grade, and they're meshing with their peers. And then once they get to the high school level, they have an outstanding team because they all know how to work together. We don't do that much.
Well, and I think we started to address this in the community meeting on middle school sports, as you're well aware. And as you and I heard and we discussed, we have some very active community groups that actually start some of our students at the age of 5, depending on the sport, before we can even get them into middle school sports. So we're trying to come up through this committee and YSS, Youth Success Summit, to see how could we address and attract and not compete among each other. But sometimes you and I know that families make a decision as to what is their kid's favorite sport, and we are, to your point, trying to attract them to participate in the sports that they're interested in. So we are trying to get that through our committee of middle school sports. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question?
Sarah, yes. So then my last question too is on the last page here of the 2019, the 5-year plan. There are 2 items here, turf at Ellet, turf at Bookville. They both say done. Were these done as of 2019, or is this the update now that they're done now?
We just went ahead and updated that because we knew those were done.
Okay.
So, but we didn't change anything else.
So then the other items in here from 2019 to 2024 are things that 5 years ago we thought might be done by now, aren't done by now. So is it possible, I guess this is not necessarily a question you can confirm or deny.
Would they
but-
move forward in the next round?
Well, as we just start having levy discussions and we say, types of things that might or might not occur related to a levy, are these the type of items that generally, because you said middle school sports last time were taken off during the levy. Are these
It
the
was
type
actually
of
off
items-
before the levy passed.
Before, okay.
Yeah.
So these the type of items that might be in that conversation?
It could be, depending on exactly what the operational funds are for. These items come out of your permanent improvement panel funds. Remember, we have a levy that's been around for a number of years that helps for permanent improvements. These are more permanent improvements. It's not that we couldn't use general fund, but you try to plan for those. And some of those funds, as you're aware, Dr. Molnar, are still tied up with the OFCC project related to the building of the schools. So there is a relegated amount that we get out of it that still remains with us. The rest goes towards the bonds that are out there until 2033. Okay? And I think Mr. Keenan was going to help answer a question for you, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I'm not, the one I have in mind right now. Sorry, gotcha. All right, sorry. This was actually in response to Ms. Hall on things to attract families and students to the schools. I'm not an Akron grad. I'm not from Akron, though my family and I moved to Akron in 2016. And my children go to Akron schools. Not active in sports, but active in other extracurriculars. But myself, I ran track and cross country all through high school, and honestly, if it weren't for my teams, I very possibly would not have graduated high school. I did not do well, was not very successful. I now have a master's degree and multiple degrees in many areas, and through adulthood have found a way to, a path that helped me. But at the time, the high school stuff, the teams were really what kept me going and kept me coming to school. It's a very negative home life. So I'm saying that because I strongly feel that the athletics facilities and the athletics programs are very important. They do really touch a lot of students that may not engage with schooling elsewhere, and they can really help a fairly decent amount of students, and some that you may not expect that it would help. And I think to attract a lot of families and more students, the facilities coming, I mean, I know I'm biased working in facilities, and that's my background, but those do make a very big difference. And not just for attractiveness externally, but internally too. You have more school pride. You have, look at this great place I have to practice. And, speaking as a student, but even as a family going and watching your child perform or your child's team perform, it really helps bind the community together. And there are some structural issues in place at multiple schools where there is not a way to physically provide certain facilities to have them at least competition ready, but what is existing can be improved. But we have to agree on where to and how to find the funding to do so. And I would really love to see that happen. I think there's a lot of really good potential here within APS to provide those things. But it will take a significant amount of time, and it will be a lot of communication to get everyone in the communities to understand what some limitations are on what is available and what can be done at certain schools, and find a way to balance those throughout the district so that it isn't loaded to one way or towards one cluster or another. And to tie into that, any current needs and many of the things listed in this spreadsheet, they were to improve existing infrastructure. It wasn't necessarily adding anything, adding any infrastructure, adding any special equipment or anything to any specific school. It was upgrading what already existed so that it was better for the teams and the families and the community's use. So that's something to keep in mind when looking at these numbers. From the outside in, not having come up through Akron, I don't necessarily know any of the history or biases or things that might be in place. And so from that viewpoint, I'm seeing these as just simply doing what needs to be done to maintain and upgrade what we currently have. We get all of those to a good baseline where everything is up to date and where it's best that we can make it with what's available, then we can build on that to start adding more infrastructure at the other schools and work on developing a plan to do so. What needs are where and how do we go about doing that? So that's...
I thank you for that. I just, want to make sure that every child has the same opportunity across the board.
Absolutely.
That's my biggest thing. And if kids if they open enroll, we don't provide the transportation, right? So if I don't have the means to send my child to, say, East, because I live in West Akron, but East has everything, my child is missing out, So I'm always, straightforward. I just want every child to have the same opportunity. So thank you for that.
There is one other thing I wanted to share with you. If you look at the very right on the Excel spreadsheet where the totals are, many of you will not know the last entry, which is Forge Field. Forge Field is the name of the field that was originally Central Howers Field. It's down there on East North Street. It is behind the central distribution, and we truly do have a competitive baseball field there. One reason we maintain that field is, for our teams in community use, we have a great relationship with Roy Hobbs, so we have summer ball and fall ball through September. But this is a unique piece of property. The deed actually says, from 1931, it was land that was donated to APS from Summit County, and we must maintain an athletic structure there, and if we do not, then the land goes back to Summit County. So we actively make sure that that field is there. It did at one time have a football area and a practice track. We've had to do some renovations there for the warehouse, the transportation location, especially as we prepared for the structure of the new Route 8 bridge replacement, because one of its main stanchions is on our very west end of our property. But we do actively maintain the baseball field, and it is well used. And it is a desirable field because we've even had some outside schools contact us about it. But we have it well scheduled already. But I didn't know if everybody knew what Forge Field was. So I just wanted to give you that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. For the sake of time, I think we have one comment, but I'm going to ask a quick question for you, Mrs. Folk. If you would please, I know we questioned about the ticket sales. Could we ask Joe to get that out to all the board members?
Yes.
So they can look at that before we do the vote on Monday, and make sure that if there's any other questions that may be had by board members, that they can ask those questions before we vote on Monday.
Absolutely. We can get that to Mr. Basilotti tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead. I'll let you go ahead. I can wait. Mine can come to the end. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mrs. Falk. So everybody at this table knows that I'm an athlete. Right? And so this is very near and dear to my heart, this discussion. I could have played soccer if I had tried. There are a couple of equity considerations that I must bring to the table. That's my job. And one is that as you look at the two columns at the right, even when you deduct the $750,000 donations from the Cleveland Browns, from Buchtel, and from Elliott. And there are lots of other donations, Dr. Molnar, you said, that we could deduct. We would then be at around $750,000 investment in Buchtel and still at $2.2 million for Elliott. So I want to say that inequities exist in our investment in our athletic facilities. What I don't know from all of the information is how we got there and why certain decisions had to be made and which priorities were given what priority. Without having the background information as to the why these decisions were made, it's really hard for me to get there. Also want to say that in reading the report, and you can see that I read it, dissected it, and internalized it. It's hard to see in the report which things were highlighted as conditions that have been completed and may still need to be addressed. For instance, we had the need for the lighting improvement at Ellet, but what I didn't understand in reading the report is whether or not we are addressing the lighting needs at all of our facilities. Because at East, there is no field lighting, which was added to this report. So I can't tell if we now have field lighting at East because there are JV football games and practice taking place at the East field without lights. So that's my equity lens. If lights are needed in one place, where else are they needed? And when can it be addressed? My third point before our public comment would be, as we're thinking about how to evaluate our facility needs and how and when items are addressed, can we also add to, I see the evaluation parameters on page 1 of the report are listed as priorities and cost estimates. I would, as an equity officer, say, can we also look at parameters like use of our facilities, the population served, the condition of the facilities, the last update and investment, previous investments made, so that we are getting a comprehensive look at how we evaluate our facilities. That's just my lens moving forward. This really, it was a good report for 2019, but I can't tell today what's completed and what's not. And I guess I would ask board members, because it took me 2 hours to go through it and to write all my notes on every single page, I would ask board members to read it. And then perhaps we come back at another equity committee meeting for those kinds of questions, because without having that background and context, I can't wrap my head around the investments in the comprehensive way I would like to do so. So that was just my comment from an equity lens, Mr. Alexander.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and Dr. Chapman, I think that's a good idea, so we can't update it. And if you update it, then you can see what the things that have been taken care of and what we may need to take care of. And I'm glad you brought up with the equity piece. I was going to bring that up a little bit too. But also looking at some of these things too, looking at now, looking at the future of what we can do, because we do have to look at what's now, but we also need to look at the future of all our facilities as well. And then I'm going to, before we have the public comment, Ms. Alexander, I know you had a comment. Yeah. I'm going to ask, what can the community, I'm specifically talking about in Bookdale area, I know that Firestone had some donors that came in and gave money over there. I had a conversation with a couple people about a little over a week ago, and they were talking about some of the same stuff, and I didn't know we were going to be talking about it today. But what can the district do to help over there to help in some of those areas? But also, what can the community do so the community is aware of what they can do? I know we talked to a couple people who said something about donations and getting the donations to come specifically. I call those corporate donations or corporate funding that comes from, or individual donors that come to the cluster to give the money that, and it's maybe earmarked. So if I give $1,000, I may want to earmark for the stadium, and if I earmark it for the stadium, those dollars should go directly to that stadium and not to somewhere else. So I'd like to get a little bit more information on that as well, because I know that those are some questions that people in the community are asking. I think that's something that we should be able to give them, to let them know how that can happen.
When the funds come in as a donation, and I'm going to give an example, the donation recently from Firestone, you had two for the track, $42,000 and $15,000. The donation forms actually came in. They were cash donations. They came in and they went to board in the donation section of the agenda with a designation that they were to be used, because on the form it actually says what is the intent. That's why it was written that way. And then they were placed into the fund that would be associated. It's the 076 fund, and then as this came up and was working for it, it was moved through into, in that case, into the 076 fund for Firestone. So yes, we do accept donations. Now you can do it one of two ways, and Dr. Thompson and Mr. Atkins may be better at this than I am. You can actually donate it directly to the district and designated to a specific project. The other one that I worked with Mr. Pendleton when he was here is to also consider the Akron Community Foundation that also does donations on behalf of the district, and then they can be designated through that as well. So there's a couple different ways to do it, but Dr. Thompson and Mr. Atkins would have a better understanding of which method is probably the better to do this. But once the funds are here, then and as an example, this lighting project that we're working on right now, this has taken us 18 months to put together. So therefore, as we got the correct vendor, we got the correct pricing, et cetera, then we said, okay, we want to move funds. That's exactly what we did for Firestone. We went and we moved it into the correct fund for Firestone when the vendor was engaged. Does that help, Mr.?
Yes, because the conversation, just so everyone knows, the conversation was a little bit about the stadium, okay, and how the track is on the outside of the stadium.
And that is the original.
Yeah, and how is it possible, how could we move the bleachers and stuff back if we have the room, put the track on the inside like it should be, and then fence it in. And I know there's some things with the concession stand and things of that nature, but is there something that they can do to help
I can
with that?
share with you, Mr. Keenan and I went out just to try and get a quote, just to get an idea if the track at Bookdale was left exactly where it is. To rubberize the track is the quote we received from Vasco, which is one of the premier people that we've used, was $575,000 to $625,000 for rubberizing. We then went to Perrin to see what a quote would be, not to rubberize, but to do asphalt, and it was $300,000. We just wanted to see what kind of ballpark figure we were looking at. Now, obviously, those particular quotes were just for information only. These are above the standards that you would use, and you have to go out and put it out for bid. And because they are, structural upgrades and stuff, as you know, you would go ahead and possibly not only work with that particular vendor, you would have to permit through Summit County, et cetera, to do that construction. But we were just interested to see what would happen so that we could appropriately plan, which is to your statement earlier, and Dr. Carla's and Ms. Alexander's, how do we go ahead and maintain what we have and then plan for the future to make sure that we can do things in a much equitable manner. But the funds have to be available or set aside and planned for so they can be done at the proper time. Unfortunately, construction costs have just soared. Especially after COVID. And so those are types of, it's always good to go out and talk to the architects and talk to the teams that put this together for us so we have an idea.
Okay. Yeah, because I think at Bookdale because the way the track is, you got to look outside. We should be inside. So that was. one of the things
I
that
will
we're-
be honest with you. That was, I don't know why anybody ever built it
I
that way,
don't
but this
know
is,
why it
well,
was either.
I was in high school at the time they did
Right.
this, guys, so I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know why it came together.
But I'm just, these are just questions I'm just bringing
Yeah,
up so that
absolutely.
we know, because the track is on the outside, it needs to be on the inside like any other field is. And so if we can somehow, I don't know if we can do it, or how much it costs, or we need to get the people, the individuals from the community as well as the district to put money together to be able to move
And
that out. so
and
we
that
have the track
possibly
inside.
could mean a change, if you could do it, because Mr. Keenan and I have talked about it, if it is not a purchase of additional property around it, it's a reconfiguration of the parking that is currently there. And Bookdale has currently 286 parking spaces for both sides of the house. So if you could do what you're proposing, what would happen if we could not, would we lose any parking for what we have?
Right.
Yes.
And that'd be a part of an assessment of how,
Yeah,
if we
absolutely.
could or we could not, but I know that would be part of the assessment.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to let Ms. Alexander, and we have one more, and then we're going to move on to our public comment.
Okay.
And we're going to move this meeting along.
Well, mine is more or less a comment/question, and piggybacking off what Carla said with regards to looking to your evaluation parameters, in addition to adding use of facilities, what type of population, the population that you're servicing, and the type of conditions. What's the process for all of that? Do you have a process in place to begin with to even begin to even put this together like this, to look at the methodologies and the priorities and the cost estimates? What was your process?
Well, please understand, at the time that this was put together, we were using our scheduling process, which you are aware that Mr. Basilati in athletics does the schedule. So we were using our old-fashioned paper method, as you know, and we aren't on that anymore. So we have our FMX, so we can actually go out. And the other part of this, to your question, Mrs. Alexander, is the fact that how many teams can play at the same time. To Carla's question earlier, middle school sports are usually played on Saturdays during the day and on Thursday nights, because the other games at night are played at the high school level. So they are scheduling around it. And as an example, fall is not just football. We have, volleyball, we have soccer, we have other things. So we're trying to your point, the assessment is how many times is a field used and what time is it open and available. So there's a much better data process to work on it as we move forward. And those events also tell you what the estimated number of people are that are attending.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Mr. Keeman, and then we're going to have our public comment. Go ahead, Mr. Keeman. You had something?
Yes, thank you. I'll try to make it as quick as I can. To answer your question with the infrastructure portion for Bookdale High School, because I've worked on that extensively over the past couple of years, is also just to try to figure out how it would be possible. And in order to be able to make the track regulation size, you're correct, the stands do need to be on the outside. That would squeeze the middle in, but then to get us the right length to have the proper curvature of each side, we would have to purchase one property on the west side of the stadium, plus lose virtually all of the parking that is in the back on the middle school side. And then we would also need to purchase a minimum of 4 properties on the east side of the stadium to be able to give us enough length, but then to move the stadium seating to the north and the south, we would need to purchase an additional 2 properties on the north side, and then on the south side, we would lose all of the parking and potentially even the driveway that is on the back side of the school, which I'm sure there's some zoning regulations that would get in the way there. But that there could be, I'm not a professional architect, there could be ways to make some adjustments to not lose as much, but I was focused more on the actual size of the track and the size of the stadiums to be able to get everything competition ready and sized. And then included on that would be, after moving those out, all of that is built on a hill and is much higher than the properties surrounding the stadium other than the school itself. So east, west, and south, or east, west, and north on the stadium is much higher. So then we would have to extend the soil level throughout on each side to be able to accommodate the addition stuff. So certainly not impossible, but that much change in infrastructure is very extensive in cost. And not just purchasing properties, but even getting that much soil to extend the stadium out to be able to build it would be tremendous. But I would love to see it happen, but that part is beyond me. But those would be the actual needs to make that a possibility or a reality.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm glad you said all that, because that's what the discussion was about. And so at least we know that we may have to buy some property, we may have to do some other things. So that's good. All right, I'm going to move on. Public comment, Pastor Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. I'm sitting here, and I am going to try to control my emotions of what I've heard here. And you've known for last 10, 15, 20 years, I've been talking about Akron Public Schools athletic program. I am a product of Akron Public Schools. I do live in the city of Akron because I want to live in the city of Akron. And I do have our kids' best interests at heart. I just want to address Bookto first. Let's make no mistake, Bookto was designed as a punishment because they wanted to keep their gym. Because they wanted to keep that gym, the school was designed around the gym. When you hire an architect, when public money is used to hire an architect, you don't let the architect tell you how the school is going to look. You let the needs of the community dictate the building. That's what you do. And this is why public engagement is so important. And I just want to use for an example, King School. When King School was designed and built, or when they had it designed, the parents said, we do not want that building to look like that in our neighborhood. And because they had a voice and they had resources and they consolidated their voices with their resources, they changed the whole design of the building. The whole design of the building from square one. So Bookto looks like it looks because no one valued the community enough to hold on to what was there. The track. The track doesn't have to be a competition track to practice on. There's still kids that go to Bookto. Bookto was the last high school and has been persistently and consistently the high school that has won track championships practicing on the track as it was. You can't send them kids somewhere else to practice and expect an outcome. So it's not just about, is it a regulation, is it competition ready? I ran track 55 years ago at Elliott. 55 years ago. So when you start to put resources in a building, absolutely you have to continue to put resources in that structure. But when we built new schools, that was a time to use equity to spread some of that stuff out. Let's go back to Bookto for a minute. Thank God for the Browns Foundation and Bookto getting turf. But let's remember, Bookto was not slated to get turf. That was Superintendent Christine Fowler, Mack, who made a call because the people in that cluster were upset because they were once again left out. That was not the school, that was Christine Fowler, Mack, calling the Browns Foundation. If you look on your spreadsheet, as I looked on mine, in 2020, I asked Diane Autry, why are we spending $88,000 for a baseball net? And that's when COVID had just started. COVID had just started. We weren't in school. We didn't know what COVID was going to be. And it came before the board to purchase a safety net for Firestone baseball because the baseball were hitting the houses. It's on this paper for $188,000. Was it 88 or was it 188? And I would ask you to look back at the board meeting, April of 2020, the board approved that, and I asked at that time, why were we approving something for a baseball when we're not even in school, and we don't know when the next time we will be in school? The natatorium. Firestone was built around the natatorium. Why couldn't we do the same with Bookto? Again, whatever we invest money in, we have to continue to invest money in. The bleachers at Bookto, the bleachers were condemned by the state. You had no choice but to fix the bleachers, but they should have never got to the condition of being condemned by the state. I live in Akron, and who should be making decisions on the priority of spending is people who send their schools to Akron. One of the board members asked, what makes Akron attractive? How can we be attractive? You can't be attractive building 60-yard football fields and taking the track away from Garfield. So Garfield had a track as well, and we took that away. So now you're telling my son that he could never practice on a 100-yard football field. He's only 75% of what other kids have. Why would I send my kids? Why would I send my kids to a school where you are not distributing resources equitably? The policies, I'm hearing about policies where our policy, where Mr. Vassalotti says this, no. Everyone who does policy should be here to answer these questions. What happens to the ticket money? Concession stands. That money stays in the cluster. Why shouldn't I get my concession money? That's an absolute. Donations. Firestone has a great parent organization, but those parents have great resources. But guess what? Firestone is not a private school. Firestone is a public school. And the money for a public school should go where it's needed. That's where it should go. Mr. Chair, I would say to you, maybe we need an ad hoc committee of citizens to help with that scoring system, because it has not worked. Of course, Elliott needs lights. Elliott has turf. Elliott has a stadium. Elliott has a track. Of course they need lights. But what will they need next? Because now you got to keep investing in that. Levy time. We pay for what we want, and we beg for what we need. That's it. We're putting money where we want to put money at. But we're going to say to the parents, we'll have to get rid of sports if you don't pass this levy. We'll have to get rid of extracurricular activities altogether if you don't pass this levy. And we've passed levy after levy after levy listening to that. And our kids are left behind because some point system, some scoring system, some policy, it's crazy. Thank you, Mr. Alexander.
These are notes that are taken, and I understand some of them because I'm an ex-athlete as well from Akron Public Schools, and so I understand when it comes to athletics and facilities. I don't want to keep us moving too slow.
Do we need clarification on the Firestone baseball safety net? Because it does say $188,000.
Yeah,
I can tell you exactly what happened. The original one was rejected by Summit County. It came back and they asked us to elevate this stadium netting higher than we anticipated. And it had to be a structure that was, when Mr. Boxer was working on this, It also had to not only be elevated, it had to take a certain wind ratio of equal to a tornado, because there were some wind issues that had to be addressed, and those came back through the permitting process. I could certainly check that, Carla, on the exact price, but on this Excel spreadsheet is what we had recorded in our purchase orders. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alexander, unless you're going to continue the conversation on this topic, I just had one final wrap up.
Okay, go ahead. We'll go with the one final.
So when we take out donations and grants and so forth, we have a budget for facilities. The monies here represent the budget, right? Minus grants and donations. I would just always ask that we consider how we're spending our money using criteria that includes a comprehensive review on how we spend the money we have, not the money we don't have. And a good example, finally, would be Mrs. Hall asked about competition track. The competition track parameters. If there isn't a competition track at Firestone and there isn't a competition track at Bookdo, one shouldn't be asphalt and one cinder. That's my equity lens. So those are the kinds of things I think we always have to be paying attention to. And with that, I'll just move on to the next item if you're good.
One just last comment I'm going to ask. When we look at these last columns too, can we, I know we have the dollars of the monies that's donated and the dollars at the school. Can we separate those so we can see it be a little clearer for us?
Yes, we can have
Okay.
that happen.
All right, great.
So just to make sure, like, take the donations and grants out, and like how you have it over here, just underneath. put
We
the
can
dollar
probably
amounts.
separate them out and put, say, I'll use Bookdale as an example. If the Bookdale has this much in general fund, then Bookdale has this much in donations. This is what the total is for Bookdale. Okay? I can get that done. All righty?
Well, I
Or
think it
do
would
you
be-
only
no,
want?
I think it'd be easier because you already gave the grand total. So one looking at this looks like, oh, we spent million plus,
Yeah.
But technically, when you look at Bookdale, when you take out that $750,000, we only spent $724,333. So if you could just put same method, just underneath, just remove donations and grants
Sure.
and give that exact total.
We can do that.
Okay.
All righty.
Oh, okay.
One last question so we can move on.
Sorry,
Dr.
yes.
We're not
Chapman.
moving on. Just
This is a great conversation.
Yes, it is.
I have two general questions that it may or may not be able to be answered, but these are selfish questions as a board member. So as a board member, as we receive things like I'm hearing we are potentially going to receive, on Monday, there's going to be something on the agenda for us to vote. And as we have our blueprint for excellence and we're starting to have listed as items from our blueprint for excellence, how everything we're doing on the agenda aligns to our overall vision and mission, and as equity is something that is woven into everything we're doing. Is there a way to have that noted in there? As it was mentioned, I don't remember where, but actually, I think Ms. Alexander's you. As we, come up with these evaluation parameters, as we re-examine these parameters, as we look at our why are we putting lights here and not lights here? Is there a way that it can be noted on there, this is an equity expense, or somehow to easily see as a board member is going through the agenda that this was something that was thoughtfully, intentionally prepared? I don't know if that's a possibility. And then the other question, selfishly as a board member, we talk about the new parameters. This is 2019. What do I need to do or be on the lookout for before we get a 2024 version? What should we expect on that? Or do you want us to re-review the 2019 version before there is a 2024 version?
I think I would ask Deborah for any updates to the interior of this report, and I'll share my notes with you.
Share your notes, Carla, please.
Because, again, as I read this, throughout it are items that I wasn't sure have been fixed, completed, taken off a list. You know, I couldn't tell. The back page lists some things, but they were not necessarily the things included within the report.
I understood.
So for me, it wasn't enough information to go on that helped me to understand the dollars spent. So if that's an update, if that's giving you a chance to read and digest as I have done, we can certainly come back and continue the conversation. Yes, you should have that.
Okay, Dr. Chapman.
All right.
Let's move on to the next item on the agenda.
Well, thank you, Ms. Folk.
Yes.
For
It's
coming
a great
in.
discussion.
I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Stephen Keenan.
Keenan, thank you, Mr. Keenan, for your presentation.
All right, so we think this is going to be a quick discussion because Mr. Deffabaugh and I have figured out we work really well together. And as a result of Dr. Molnar's Legal, Contracts, and Board Policy Committee, which discussed the racial equity policy and the supplier diversity section of that policy, I then began some research on what other districts are doing in that area. And just to note, I reviewed Atlanta, Columbus, Walworth, New York, Grenada Central School District, Hazelwood and Florissant, Missouri, Houston Independent School District, and the New York City Public Schools to see what kinds of things they were doing. Columbus really had a community inclusion and supplier diversity policy that we wanted to begin to draft for consideration by the Legal, Contracts, and Policy Committee. This is just a draft, only a draft. Mr. Deffabaugh has a recommendation to continue some research to avoid conflicts with other policies, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman.
No, that's just a draft.
I'll keep it brief. So Dr. Chapman's correct. She brought me the draft policy of the community inclusion and supplier diversity. And what we want to do now for thoroughness is I want to make sure it's consistent and operates effectively with our other board policies, particularly 6325 as well as 6320. There are some federal requirements for contracts and procurement, so I want to make sure and be assured that we're all consistent across the board. So we're going to take some time, and I appreciate the Legal and Contracts and Policy Committee where I generally attend, and I'll be transplanting over here to assist Dr. Chapman and see if we can put together and figure out what the best way is to move forward with this draft.
And just for your reference, policy 6320 is around purchases, and policy 6325 is around procurement. So we just want to be sure we are consistent in our language so that we can move forward. But I am very excited about the potential for this. It has been long coming and overdue, and happy to see that other districts are doing this work and that we are now too. Any questions for me or Mr. Deffabaugh?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. Thank you guys for bringing this so we can look at it. I know, Dr. Chapman, you said something about Columbus, and I didn't really get a chance to read it, but this is going to force me to read this and a couple other policies which need to be read. So thank you guys for bringing it. I would ask if you guys have anything else on your agenda? Okay. If we don't, we have any questions by individuals?
I do have a quick question regarding the contractors and things like that. I know that, across the board, even here within the city, we need to make it so that people have an opportunity to bid on jobs and not continue to give the same jobs to the same companies when we have multiple companies within the city of Akron. So I do like the fact about promoting the district contract and procurement process, just to make sure that always going with the lowest bidder does not always mean best. And I know we try to make sure that, we stay within budgets and things like that. But if there's another contractor that can do the same thing, but maybe $1,000 over or something like that, I'm not exactly sure what the laws are with, as far as just opportunity. Scratch what I just said, because I'm getting to be all over the place. But when we always go with the lowest bidders, we don't open doors for everyone else. So I don't know, far as I'm not a legal person, I'm not a finance person, but just giving opportunities to other companies instead of always the lowest bidder.
Member Hall, I agree, and I believe Ms. Folk is an encyclopedia on procurement, so I would defer, but my understanding is it's not just lowest.
It is not lowest. It's lowest, most responsive, responsible bid.
Okay.
And there are very specific statutes. 6325, to Dr. Carla's reference, is procurement, but it is also procurement using federal funds and grants. It is very specific as to what you can and cannot do. Ohio Revised Code certainly says that we also should use the lowest, most responsible bidder. And when we put out our RFPs for securing items, your board policy does say, first of all, anything less than $10,000, we can go out and purchase. Anything $10,000 and above must have a minimum of 3 quotes. Anything $25,000 and above must come before the board to purchase. Anything construction-wise $50,000 and above must be put out for a 30-day bid unless it's urgent necessity. Then you get into higher standards when you get to federal procurement. They are standards for micro purchase, macro purchase, sealed bids, etc. And if you certainly are aware, Ms. Hall, we get a number of federal funds through your child nutrition program, through your Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title IX, your SPED contracts, and your McKinney-Vento. Those are the few I can think of. So we truly do put those out. I'll use debarment as an example. We can't have any company that is debarred from even being paid by federal funds. So that is included in the RFP statement that goes out, and we were one of the first in the area to always include that. So this kind of process that Dr. Chapman has brought forth is going to be a boost to us looking at, to your point, trying to engage the appropriate companies that would be in the local area. The other thing that we also do have is we also belong to a number of consortiums that allow us to use state bidded contract, and I'll use one as an example. They go out at the state level, they do the procurement, and as long as it's done correctly and meets our board policies, we are able to take advantage of those contracts at the lowest, most responsible bid as well. So therefore, a number of your companies for some of our programming, and I'll use child as an example, we get funds to actually procure fresh fruits and vegetables from the Department of DOD, and those procurements come through the Department of Defense. You will never see a banana bought because we don't grow bananas within the United States, and that's one of the criteria, that it has to be a U.S.-born fruit. If we're serving pineapple, that's fresh, it's coming from Hawaii. So those are some of the other statutes, but it is not just the lowest cost. Okay?
And Mrs. Hall, you will see referenced in this community inclusion and supplier diversity policy the Ohio Revised Code, responsive, most responsible bid language, reference to federal information is in there. And so you'll see it when you review it, that we want to be consistent and not in conflict with our regulations while upholding, elevating, and amplifying our commitment to local enterprise inclusion in the business of our district. So we're not trying to violate law,
Right.
but we are trying to be more inclusive in our contracting, procurement, purchases, and business.
Member Hall, I was going to follow up, but I can't say it any better than Dr. Chapman, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, that's good. This is some good discussion, and we have very good discussion this evening. Before I say close, is any other questions we may have from anyone? No questions? Okay. Again, it was very good discussion. A lot we did this meeting. I like a lot of the questions because some of the questions I'm not one that always have to ask them during an open meeting. I can get on there and text somebody, get it, and I can come back. So that's why you guys don't hear me talking a lot. But I think this was good. A public comment, Pastor Harris is taken well deed. And so at this time, if we have nothing else, we can adjourn.
Did we approve the minutes?
Yeah, we did that up front, yeah.